Putin is delaying negotiations with Ukraine until October, but not for peace. He wants total capitulation. Russian invaders are storming the border of Dnipropetrovsk region. The Pokrovsk direction is ablaze. And in Istanbul, Russians threatened Ukrainian diplomat Serhiy Kyslytsya, saying he would lose even more of his loved ones. A new pontiff stands with Ukraine. Pope Leo XIV held a personal meeting with Zelensky after his inauguration. Special Operation Double. The Kremlin is launching a wave of fakes and manipulations against Ukraine and Europe. Let me introduce myself, Karina Klishun. And before we begin, subscribe to our channel. Like this video if we've caught your interest. Things are about to get heated. First, a summer offensive, then negotiations. Putin is postponing dialogue with Ukraine until October. This is reported by journalists from Deutsche Welle. And all because, in the opinion of the Russians, during a 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine would rearm, produce a lot of drones, and build fortifications. Meanwhile, Russia would suffer heavy losses, which of course they do not want. That's why, until there is a stalemate at the front, no one will sit down at the negotiating table. The Russians do only understand the language of force. Meanwhile, Russia is currently advancing as much as possible on the front and trying to break through to the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. This was stated by Timochko, the head of the Council of Reservists of the Ukrainian Ground Forces. But he noted that the war will not last even 5 years because the Russians will not be able to fight at this pace for so long. It is just as difficult for us as well. At the moment, the situation in Donbass is quite difficult. And the Russians are trying to stage actions by raising their tricolor flag as they advance. This is being reported by Deep State. That's exactly what happened in the settlement of Bohatyr. And this is a vivid example of how the Russians hang flags on the outskirts to show online that they have captured the entire town. That's why it makes it more difficult to verify the enemy's advances.
When there are dozens of such actions a day, it's impossible to check each one. In most cases, it's just incursions into the rear and flag raising. But of course, there are also instances of real enemy advances.
However, the enemy continues to assault without pause. The Pokrovsk direction is on fire. Logistics in the Kostiantynivka direction are also problematic. The occupiers are trying to take out any transport with drones. Moreover, as reported by the Institute for the Study of War, Russia is likely preparing for a new offensive north of Kharkiv. A recent reconnaissance in force south of Zhuravlivka in the Belgorod region may indicate preparations for a new offensive operation in the Kharkiv region. Meanwhile, as scheduled, we have more threats from Medvedev. He has started hinting at nuclear weapons and a new phase of the conflict. He stated that the failure of peace negotiations could lead to an even more horrific stage.
Unsuccessful negotiations could provoke an even more terrible war with new participants and new weapons.
Presumably, this refers to the use of nuclear weapons and a conflict with NATO countries. Also, as noted by the Institute for the Study of War, the Kremlin is preparing for a protracted war and is deliberately dragging out the negotiation process. After all, the Kremlin's approach to negotiations indicates that Russia's goal remains the complete capitulation of Ukraine. The Russian side does not see ending the war as a result of compromises, but instead puts forward its own territorial claims as a condition for a truce, rather than as a subject for dialogue. A meeting of the leaders will still take place, but in the form of a phone call. As Trump stated, on Monday he will speak with both Putin and Zelensky in order to stop this war. He shared this on the social network X. Peskov Takin has already confirmed that the Kremlin is preparing for this call. Trump promises that the day will be productive. However, he said the same thing before the meeting that was supposed to take place in Istanbul. But as journalists from The Telegraph write, a meeting between Trump and Putin is Ukraine's worst nightmare. After all, Kyiv could be confronted with the reality of a catastrophic deal.
Instead of demonstrating his desire to join Europe by imposing much tougher sanctions against Moscow, the US president decided to reward his Russian counterpart with a face-to-face meeting that he had long sought.
Putin began the negotiations, face-to-face with the US president. This is a meeting to which Volodymyr Zelensky will not be invited. It would cement Russia's status as a great power. It would recall the superpower summits out of the Cold War era, when Moscow and Washington met as equals to discuss the fate of the planet. Ukrainian officials fear that at such a meeting, Putin would have Trump's full attention without any intermediary who could defend their interests. They also fear that a vulnerable Trump, whose instincts often seem more sympathetic to Russia, would agree to a settlement that would then be presented to Ukraine as a fait accompli. However, Wingbeth Orbán, as U.S. Secretary of State Rubio noted, if there is no progress in ceasefire negotiations with Russia in the near future, the Senate will pass a new bill imposing sanctions against Russia.
Alexander Medinsky. So we do not want to be involved in this process of endless talks. There needs to be some progress, some movement forward.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
And if the Russian Federation continues to put forward unacceptable conditions, it will significantly affect Washington's position. Do you think Putin will be intimidated by this? Will Trump have the courage to say all of this out loud? Write your thoughts in the comments. Russia made harsh threats against the Ukrainian delegation. As recounted by a member of the Ukrainian delegation, former official representative to the UN Serhiy Kyslytsya, during the negotiations in Istanbul, the Russian delegates threatened them like gangsters.
Serhiy Kyslytsya. There was a chilling moment when reportedly the Russians threatened their counterparts like gangsters. Perhaps some of those sitting here at this table will lose more of their loved ones, said Medinsky. Russia is ready to fight forever.
The Economist correspondent Oliver Carroll responded to Kyslytsya's report and suggested that Putin's delegates in Istanbul wanted to intimidate Kyslytsya personally.
Oliver Carroll, that key. Last year, Serhiy Kyslytsya, then Ukraine's ambassador to the UN and now a member of the delegation in Istanbul, informed the Security Council that his nephew had been killed in combat in 2022. It is possible that Medinsky's remark was directed specifically at him.
However, as Kyslytsya pointed out, the intimidation tactic did not work. On the contrary, it had the exact opposite effect, as it only strengthened the resolve of Ukrainians. The new Pope, Leo XIV, has officially taken office. In his inaugural speech, the pontiff mentioned Ukraine.
Benedict XVI's war-weary Ukraine is finally awaiting negotiations for a just and lasting peace.
Tim. Zelensky met with J.D. Vance for the first time since their verbal exchange at the White House. They shook hands during the ceremony. Another important point. Immediately after the official mass, Zelensky and the First Lady had an audience with the Pope. It is not known for certain what was discussed during the closed meeting. But on Monday, the new Pope was already in communication with Zelensky. By the way, the President of Ukraine became the first foreign leader with whom the pontiff spoke. Interestingly, it is in the Vatican that a meeting between Zelensky and Putin could take place. This was stated by Rubio, who supported the Pope's proposal, because it was the newly elected Pope who suggested holding peace talks in the Vatican. As Rubio put it, the Holy See could become the place for a new attempt to achieve peace between Ukraine and Russia. Well, we'll see how things develop. The Kremlin continues to carry out special operations on EU territory, this time in Poland. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the Kremlin has stepped up its doppelganger special operation there. This is yet another phase of the information war against European society. Russian special services are creating websites and social media pages that, in terms of content and visuals, closely resemble the official pages of Western media outlets. Then, on these sites, the Kremlin posts fake information disguised as real news. For example, to influence Polish voters since March of this year, Russian special services have been spreading false and manipulative messages using bots that imitate real voters. The main messages were criticism of Ukraine, calls for Poland to leave the EU, and the discrediting of politicians. However, the Kremlin still has allies. Orbán, who openly discredits Ukraine. Orbán asked NATO to protect Hungary from Ukraine. He complained to NATO Secretary General Rutte about the actions of Ukrainian special services.
Orbán is a Yugoslav. And in the words of the Prime Minister, it is unprecedented for a country that is not a NATO member, while seeking good relations with the alliance, to conduct a coordinated financial and organized campaign to discredit a NATO member state.
Even though it's clear that this is nonsense, Orbán continues to support Kremlin narratives. Meanwhile, at the Cannes Film Festival, U2 frontman Bono and director Sean Penn walked the red carpet with Ukrainian boys, soldiers. According to Bono, Sean Penn brought friends from the trenches and the front line in Ukraine to the festival. On the red carpet were bandura player and UAV operator Taras Stolyar, opera singer and territorial defense fighter Yuri Ivaskievich, who lost a leg in combat, and violinist and reconnaissance officer Olha Rukavishnikova, who lost an eye in the war. From the stage, Bono addressed our defenders with words of gratitude, quoting, "Thank you because you are defending our freedom. Glory to Ukraine!" That's all for now. Please like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, and we'll definitely see each other again.